Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast, where we explore groundbreaking ideas with today's leading thinkers. I'm Chris Dabbs, and today we have a fascinating guest, Kenneth J. Hamer-Hodges. Now, this is going to be super interesting as Kenneth is a computer security expert, researcher, and author specializing in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital governance. Kenneth was born in Portsmouth, England, where he contributed to the design of the PP250, the first commercial capability-based computer. He now lives in South Florida, USA, and he's dedicated his career to understanding and shaping the future of cyberspace. His books, including Civilizing Cyberspace, The Fight for Digital Democracy, and Winning World War III, Industrial Strength Computer Science, tackle the urgent challenges of digital warfare, AI governance, and online security. Now, his latest work, The Fate of AI Society, Civilizing Superhuman Cyberspace, explores the pressing questions of our time: cyber warfare, AI-driven propaganda, quantum security, and the battle for digital democracy. And, basically we're talking about your book, aren't we? The Fate of AI Society.
Thank you. Yes, and I really appreciate you having me on.
No, that's great. That's great. We want to know. Our viewers, listeners, and everybody wants to know about cyber warfare, AI, and its implications for everybody. So no, don't worry about that, Kenneth. And I think we're really fortunate to have you on. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
See, we're so polite. We're so polite. That's what I like.
How about it?
So first of all, give me a bit of background about yourself. Just let me know, well, how did you get into this? Because it sounds like a fascinating arena.
Well, when I graduated in 1966 or 7, I can't remember now, you couldn't buy computers. You couldn't buy software. If you wanted to do anything with computer science, you had to begin at the beginning with a blank sheet of paper and carve it out for yourself. It was a real do-it-yourself job. There was only really one company that was producing computers that were being sold in big quantities, and that was IBM. And they were still using the von Neumann architecture, which everybody is still using today, and was developed by von Neumann just after World War II in 1945-46 on the first machine he worked on. But he didn't start computer science. It began 10 years earlier, just before the Second World War, when Alan Turing was studying for his doctorate in Princeton University in New Jersey. And he chose that because there was a gentleman called Alonzo Church, who was the leader of the thought process that led to computer science at that time. And he was working on the abstract side of things, and Turing was working on the mechanical, digital side of things. And the two ideas came together in what we call today the Church-Turing thesis. So if you want to know, when I graduated in 66, if you wanted to understand anything about computer science, you had to understand these two sides. There weren't any books to buy.
Oh, sure.
It wasn't being taught in college. You couldn't buy it off the shelf. And the industry I was working for was telecommunications. I worked for a UK company called Plessey. And I'd studied as an intern with them several times, and they offered me a full-time job. And when I took the job, they said, we want you to start with a project for our telecommunications group. Well, back in those days, telecommunications was hammered out in huge mechanical factories. And I can still remember walking through a factory we had at Liverpool, going down aisles where huge guys were banging out Strowger switches, which was Strowger was patented in something like 1890.
Yeah.
So we were still making Strowger switches in one form or another. There were alternatives, early digital technology being used, but they had nothing that was programmable. And Plessey wanted to make something programmable. So they put in those days a lot of money, £5 million invested in R&D on computers. How does the telecommunications industry get into digital computers? But the existing technology was able to achieve incredibly high reliability. one call dropped in a million, maybe, and 50 years mean time between failure. And remember, the number of telephone exchanges in London was tremendously a big number. And if you had a reliability of decades, you could minimize the number of failures. And the press, it was a public utility, telecommunications. So the press leapt on any mistakes and failures. The point that I'm really trying to make is that the reliability requirements for telecommunications were so demanding that to be able to build and design a computer with software in it that could match the existing technology of 50 years between major failures and only one call dropped in a million, you had to think outside the box. And that meant going back to the work of Church and Turing instead of the work of von Neumann.
Right.
Von Neumann left the difficult part out. And so the binary computers that we use today do not follow the science. The science is enshrined in the Church-Turing thesis. And the two sides of computer science have a digital side that Alan Turing pioneered, and a logical side that Alonzo Church pioneered. And when you put the two together, you can create fault-tolerant computer science.
Incredible.
But because the lambda calculus part is missing from a binary computer, they have to go to incredible complexity of building an operating system and making the hardware privilege so that the super user of the operating system could get access to virtual memory and all the other specialized ideas they created, all of which are accidental. Virtual memory adds nothing to computer science. It's been for the last 80 years a total distraction. And the only reason it became virtual memory was because memory was so short and programs rapidly grew. And so virtualizing memory as a page-based system became a good idea for the technology of that day and the situation they were in. Yeah. But it didn't add anything to computer science.
Amazing. I mean, you know, the way that you speak about this is fascinating because, and the time that you're doing this as well is an era changing sort of time, isn't it? You know, you've got where you live now in Florida, the space race is going on. You know, the Americans and everybody else or whoever's involved in that are working really hard to try and make sure that they've got the computers that they need in order to perform their function of going to the moon. And you're talking about something that some people might think is being mundane, but it's not, because it's communication. The world exists on that. And without those Strauger switches, which I know very well, strangely enough. So, you know, those sort of
it's a beautiful system. I mean, yeah. It was brilliant for its day. The man was a genius. Have you heard the story? He was an undertaker. And he bought a telephone in the old days when there weren't any switches at all. Yeah. And he put it on his desk, but he found he wasn't getting any calls and his competitor was getting the business. And when he investigated, he found that the switchboard was being manned by his wife or his mistress. And when calls, and it was all voice activated, Steve Jobs would have loved it. Get me the undertaker. Yeah. And the girl on the switchboard always went into his competitor's plug. He went home and he decided to use his Victorian hat box for his undertaker business and his wife's hairpins, and he prototyped the first Strauger switch.
As you say, it's beyond imagination. Where do those ideas come from? These people who can invent like that is just amazing. And you know, you're similar to that in terms of being able to look at, well, proto code, I guess, really, and try to create a whole language for computers that has to work with so few resources, physically resources. I mean, are you talking about transistors, by the way, or are we still talking about vacuum tubes?
Oh, in the 66, we were using what was called 74 series digital transistors in a package, a little flat pack.
Right.
But it was still bulky compared to what we can achieve today.
Of course.
I mean, we worked on, let's say, a 64K memory system that was the size of a refrigerator. Okay, and today it's packaged 10 times that size with the computer as well, all on a little tiny chip.
Well, here on my watch,
Yeah,
right?
on your watch.
On my watch, yeah, exactly. I think now I'm aware of the that those sort of limitations in home computers. I used to have a TRS-80, and so we started off with 4K of RAM. But I mean, that was tiny compared to what you obviously were working with. So okay, so thank you for that. That was obviously fascinating. So how did you then get into thinking about your, I guess, your area of study nowadays? So especially with this book in terms of cybersecurity, because was it even considered back then that people would hack in? I guess they did in the 70s, didn't they? But what about early?
Early, I would say that I can still remember we brought in Maurice Wilkes to be a consultant for our project. Very advanced idea within Plessy to bring in a Cambridge professor to be he didn't act as the architect, he acted as the guidance. And he introduced us immediately. I mean, it was almost his first meeting with us. To the work of a gentleman called Bob Fabry. He'd been one of the tutors or advisors on Bob's work. Bob had developed the magic number machine in Chicago, which was a first attempt to define a capability-based computer. Now, this is a very novel idea at the time because capabilities themselves weren't introduced until something like 1966 by names are escaping me right now. How can I forget? But anyway, capability-based addressing is different from what von Neumann's binary computers do and what we do still today.
Right.
And my simple way of saying it is that the world has moved from a mechanical world of World War II to an information age, which is arriving with AI. People will argue that it was around earlier, but in my mind, it doesn't really arrive until we change the addressing structure from a mechanical addressing structure of absolute hardware addresses that's shared by all, including malware, good software, bad software, digital mistakes, whatever you care, can interfere when you use physical addresses. If you move to the information age and think in your own head, when you talk about ideas, you don't talk about them in physical ways in your head. You think of them as abstract ideas. And abstraction is the difference between one side of computer science and the other side of computer science. So Alonzo Church's work, which was ignored by von Neumann, is equally important to Alan Turing's work, which the whole world is obsessed by.
Right.
But if you can't put them together, you can't engineer software. You can't program security, which is a critical issue. We'll talk about it, I think, later. Programming security is almost the first requirement of a instruction set. A computer that can't program security can't solve the real problems of computer science. Right. So programming security is a first requirement. And then the second requirement, the ability to do all of the other RISC instructions that a binary computer have, augment the mechanisms. And in the fullness of time, it's my opinion that you should understand Turing's binary computer. And I imagine that Church and Turing in Church's office back in 1936 discussed this. But the binary computer needs to be encapsulated by the lambda calculus.
Right.
Now you change the visibility of physical addresses is hidden by the requirement to use logical addresses.
Okay, so this is the first step towards the security issue.
That's right. So A equals B, we teach our kids at school, A equals B plus C. They learn the idea of abstract reasoning when they start at school with maths. And the really good ones go on to work with all of the symbols that exist in science. And they all have meaning. A equals B plus C. There's 5 symbols involved.
Yeah.
But they all have meaning. And they all need to be thought of as independent. And they are individually require security.
That's a good point, actually. It doesn't just appear out of the ether, does it? This A, B, C. It doesn't just appear. As you say, there are 5 items, if you like, that need to be. Yeah, wow. I mean, thinking about it like that, for a lay person like me is, scary. So, okay. But, no, I understand. Obviously, the point is that if you're creating a system that does whatever it's supposed to do, you need to look at the security side of things. And obviously in the 70s or 60s or whatever, we had, I can't remember the guy's name, maybe the one who was doing the phone phreaking,
right.
over in
Well,
California.
actually, Jobs was one of the earliest to do phone phreaking.
Oh, was he really? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Which is hacking the payphone
Right.
system, wasn't
Hacking
it?
the telephone system.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
And that's an interesting point. Let's just quickly state that the lady at the switchboard who always routed the calls to her boyfriend or husband, I don't know which was true, but avoiding Strowger. Now, therein lies an interesting question about security and correctness. Did she do anything wrong? It's not clear to me that she did.
It's a good point, actually. Get me the Undertaker. Okay, then.
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. Okay, so ethically,
to me, to answer that question and some of the other more awkward questions that I'm sure you'll pose is not a question of ethics. It's a question of science.
Right.
And so when it comes down to digital computers, you solve the problem through science. And science is, if you take natural science, it exists ethically. That is the definition from which we extract ethics, but we don't hide it through, we don't translate it through the human mind. We use the raw science.
Yeah.
And by using the raw science, everybody in the world will share the same answer. And it can't be open to question. I often think that, and I use in my books when people read them, the example of the abacus. 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, let's say in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, the abacus democratized arithmetic. And for the whole length of the Silk Road, everybody could understand the truth, if I can use that word, about arithmetic.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what, in my view, energized trade and energized the start of civilization. And in my own mind, I believe that if we translate to a better form of computer science that democratizes it in the way that Church and Turing defined, then the results will be astounding.
Yeah.
Because democratizing computer science will de-skill it.
Right, exactly.
It will increase the workforce to work on it. And as a result of that, it will empower progress that we just don't even dream about today. We won't know how far it will take us.
No, exactly. It's the same, I guess, with Gutenberg, isn't it? With the printing press and how that, scribes were then pushed aside. And as you're saying the same thing with the abacus, the people who held that power, held that knowledge of mathematical computations, or however everyone agreed to do it, again, were pushed aside. So computing is kind of going that way, isn't it? I mean, and this is why we're talking about AI, where people can now access ChatGPT and various other OpenAI, whatever they are, and then be able to create all sorts of things without any programming expertise at all.
Skills, which is great, but they can't program security. So binary computers, which are basically ones and zeros, have built abstractions of all sorts of concepts over time, but you're faced in the end with a binary choice about security. You either have none, or you give it to somebody else.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Now,
we'll
there's no privacy
sorry.
with regard to computer security.
Yet. Oh, sorry. Well, of course, then we've got a problem, haven't we? Which we're going to talk about later on with your quantum, the future, I guess, of quantum.
Yeah.
That really excites me. It really does. But I have to say that. But before we get there, because we can all get excited and just go straight there, let's talk about your book. So come on, tell me about this current book that we're actually talking about now. We're talking about sort of weaponizing AI and things like that, aren't we? And cybersecurity.
Well, my whole life has been focused on all these same things, one form or another. So I've been at it a long time.
Right.
And obviously my ideas have matured and changed and evolved. But I've written 3 books. I think of it as a trilogy. The what is industrial strength computer science. The why do we need it? And the how do we get there? And this particular book, The Fate of AI Society, is the why. And if we don't do it, it's my belief that we will descend into digital dictatorships. And let me explain why.
Yes, please.
The only way security exists in cyberspace is whatever the programs, it's done by software, and whatever the operating system decides is a flaw is stopped. It is not a scientific approach. In the end, it's always done by somebody who programs something that says, oh, these are bad ideas. Look what's happening over here. But in the final analysis, they can't solve every problem because there is no way to program security in the original binary computer. Yeah. So the consequence of building AI and all these other wonderful things that are no doubt hugely productive and helping us tremendously is that one day they will be attacked and they will be brought down. And would you, here living in America, I say to myself, the Pentagon wouldn't allow the enemy to have a weapon that is better than an American weapon.
Sure, of course.
But in cyberspace, that's not true.
No.
In cyberspace, I call them the CRINC axis: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Right.
Invested in dictatorships. They need to preserve themselves, and they only can by enforcing their will on others. If they could bring down democracy using the internet and the failures of binary computers, don't you think they'll do it?
I think some people at this point would ask, for what benefit? What benefit would they get from doing that?
Survival.
Purely survival there. So to just
survival.
Basically compartmentalize the enemy into going back to the Stone Age, and then we can continue as we're going.
Right. Or we can gain economically from it, bring them to their knees so that we can gain.
Yeah. But effectively survival.
They are not going to subscribe to any ethical standards that we care to publish. Even if we could agree, I don't believe ethical standards will solve the AI problem.
Yes. Yeah.
We're going to spend a huge amount of effort on it. And no doubt a lot of eloquent people will be able to encourage people to develop ethical standards, but they'll be useless in the real conflict, because the real conflict is between good and evil, between dictatorship and democracy, between greed and love or something.
Yeah.
And as long as the human nature is the way it is, which is full of these flaws, the 7 deadly sins, we can't legislate them away. So if we're building, would you ever build a bridge that you could guarantee would fail?
Right. Well, no, of course, yeah.
But we're building computers that way.
Interesting. So, okay, so just to wrap the ethical side of legislating, or at least putting in some sort of formula, I guess, for AI and all of this, because everyone's fighting for this at the moment, aren't they? The UK is fighting to become a leader in being able to hem in AI and big tech. Europe's trying to do the same. The US is trying to do the same. Everyone's trying to do it. But really all they're going to end up doing, if anything, is putting together a framework that they want big tech to follow, like social media or whoever else. But what we're talking about here aren't those sort of actors. We're talking about people who have an overtly bad outlook to what
Bad
they're
actors.
doing, right? Bad
Yeah.
actors. Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
you can't legislate them away. You have to engineer them out of the picture.
Absolutely. So, I mean, how do you think that happens then? I mean, first of all, let's go back to how they would do this. How would these bad actors look at destabilizing the West, or whatever you might want to call it?
Do you recall last summer? It was actually on my birthday, July the 13th last year.
Okay.
CrowdStrike released an update that brought down the world of Windows computers.
Incredibly.
Yeah. So the first lesson from that is that the system, however hard we've tried, and we've been at it now for multiple decades, maybe 50, 60 years, trying to build security into a centralized operating system. And it's, in my opinion, it was bound to fail, and it has failed. And there's nothing we can do about it, because there are physical hacks that can be done in a binary computer that can undermine the operating system in a flash.
Okay, physical.
And not physical acts. There's a bug called I'm getting old. The trouble is, I'm getting old.
We're all getting old. Yeah.
The confused deputy attack.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, you must tell us more about that.
The confused deputy attack uses the privileged gap, the gap in privilege between the super user of the operating system and the regular user, right, to take a request and manipulate the operating system through a third party, yet another app, to elevate the request's privileges. The first example of this attack was way back, and probably in the early 70s, or even perhaps the late 60s. Wow. And it took place on a system where somebody requested the billing records to be changed. And because he mistyped the address of the file, the operating system went ahead and deleted something critical in the system. He didn't have the privilege to do it himself, so he asked the operating system to do it. And in asking the operating system, he was asking a super user.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess so, right?
So the super user has all the permissions in the world.
Right. Wow.
So you give it a flaky file address. This is just there are loads of ways people are trying to block this and say it can be stopped. And there are huge overheads with doing it. Mm. And those huge overheads are buried in the system now. Yeah. And most of them work. But the fundamental flaw is that the gaps and cracks in the von Neumann architecture allow people to take advantage of the default privileges they had in the first place.
Right.
The default privilege of a basic instruction is anywhere in memory is valid. I have an address, 24 bits, 64 bits, 128 bits, and I can put any number of binary noughts and ones in any order into that field and address memory.
Right.
Doesn't mean to say it belongs to me, or I even know what I'm doing.
No, exactly. Unless you.
That is the essence of the physical world's influence, the mechanical world's influence upon computer science. And if you change the paradigm to the mental process of thinking about abstractions, it's always names. A equals B plus C. There's nothing physical in that. It's all hidden. Until we change computer science, the computer itself, to address this way, the problem will always, forever, remain unsolved.
Okay. So, change the computer, you say?
Yep.
Go.
You have to think of it like COVID-19.
Yeah.
It's a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It's infecting the world with malware and corruption. And the end game is it may not be human life that will all end, but the economy will come to a grinding halt. Industry will be stopped. You take that big freeze that CrowdStrike and now engineer it as a weapon in China or North Korea or any one of the CRINC axis. And they can spend years at it, and they will implant the necessary aids into the infrastructure in advance of trying to activate the weapon.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do to stop that.
Well, it's
a terminal case that we have to change. So now if you accept that it's like COVID-19, then the same response that we used for COVID-19 is appropriate. A warp speed development, competitively run between competent suppliers. In the UK, ARM is an example. And you would tell them, here is government funding for you to produce a vaccine. I call it the lambda calculus vaccine because it follows Alonzo Church and it builds the computer with both sides. And you have 18 months to do it or 2 years to do it. And actually, ARM is halfway there. They began to think about capabilities about a decade ago after the crash program by DARPA. And they now have a framework, but they still kept the operating system as a centralized force inside their solution.
Right.
And that denies everything because just that its mere existence guarantees that it's corruptible.
So what would is it easy to explain what replaces an operating system then in terms of
Okay, so there's no operating system in nature. Nature works on an atomic cellular basis governed by science.
Right.
And the lambda calculus that Church recognized, because it always existed, he didn't invent it as such.
Right.
He recognized it, exists throughout nature. There's a gentleman from Cambridge, his name is Richard Dawkins, who's written a lot about, one of his books is called The Blind Watchmaker, which explains how nature develops something so incredible as humanity in incremental steps.
Sure.
Another book he wrote was about the selfish gene. In his concept, everything is invested in the smallest element. And so atomically, you have to defend computer science with A equals B plus C atomically.
Right.
Each one is an abstraction. And the abstraction has digital walls. And the digital walls can be guarded by capability-based addressing. And so you translate the instructions from being physical instructions into logical instructions. You empower each instruction with capabilities that you only issue. I call them golden tokens. These golden tokens are digital gold. They're immutable digital objects that cannot be manipulated by any instruction in the system. Now, that doesn't mean to say that computer science can't be affected in other ways. I'm not saying it solves all nature's problems, but it solves all the digital problems. And you can invest in each instruction an immutable name to go with the action that the instruction is asking for. And if you don't have the right capability to do it, you can't do it.
Okay.
So now you've broken the system down from being an opaque compilation as big as an operating system or even bigger in some cases. Instead of being a huge block of physical addresses, you've broken it down into an atomic structure that actually can stretch right across the network.
Right.
At Plessey, we could write a single line of machine code. We had no operating systems and no compilers, but we could write a single line of machine code that would say, connect me to my mother. These are 3 simple steps. We actually had to have a fourth one, which was assumed, which was switch.
Right.
identifying the switch that we wanted to use. Connect is the function you want to use. Me is the identifier, and my mother is the other party.
Sure.
Now, that's one line of machine code. It can be made fail-safe, and it can abstract anything in the world that you like. That my mother could be in Australia.
Yeah, right. So yeah, as long as the system knew, obviously, what
Well, at every atomic level,
yeah.
They all have their own responsibilities, and
Yeah.
they're all organized atomically, and they all are issued with their golden keys to be able to interpret the functions they're responsible for, and no more.
No, exactly.
Now, you can't launch malware into that system and expect it to work because it has no keys. You don't give it any.
No. So, okay, so no, I think, being a layperson again, but I'm sure that our listeners understand far more than I do. So I'm probably spending too much time trying to understand it myself, if you see what I mean. So let's go on to our great subject here, which is obviously quantum then, right? So quantum computing,
Okay.
and really how that impacts what you're talking about, because all of the strategies that we've just discussed are obviously for our current technology. But quantum computing has the potential, well, not the potential, when it's realized, will change everything. Am I right?
It has the possibility that it can do that. But let me say this. I don't believe there will ever be a personal or a mobile computer that's using the technology as we understand it today. It requires cryogenic, high tolerance environments. And as such, it's dedicated to the cloud. It'll be run in a huge data center with a mass of people around it, all working and trained to keep quantum computer on the rails.
Right.
The computer science I'm talking about is for everybody else.
Okay. Yeah.
The mobile personal computer for the masses that don't understand computer science.
Yes. So
and if we, so
sorry,
we
I was
have,
going to say, both will still exist then. So we're not
yes,
talking about quantum computing just completely usurping everything else.
it couldn't. It doesn't have the ability to do that. The individual is already flummoxed by the binary computer.
Yeah.
So, and the opaque operating system, which is my bugaboo. We've got to get rid of that and replace it with the understanding of atomic software. A equals B plus C, symbolically addressed.
Right.
And everybody can understand that because they're taught in school. I'd go further and say, if we move this way, school children would write programs before they wrote English.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Okay. But actually, if you think about it, I suppose it's more logical, isn't it? We're not talking about, tenses and things like that. It's quite straightforward. So let's have a quick fire session now, Kenneth, on basically decentralized, which I'm quite interested in, versus centralized digital control. There's an ongoing debate, apparently, about whether the future internet should be more decentralized. Okay, which is quite interesting because I thought it pretty much was, but I guess they're talking about using blockchain to decentralize it even further, or perhaps even regulating it more under central authorities, which sounds a bit strange as well. So what's your take on this, and how does each model impact digital democracy?
Well, democracy is built by individuals, and every individual is different. If we're going to sustain democracy in the digital age, we have to go decentralized. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all. And anything that's centralized needs to be questioned very carefully, because the end game of centralized control is eventually dictatorship. If you believe that the information age will last forever, it is inappropriate to even think about the current solution in the future. You cannot have a few companies, a handful of industrial leaders, owning all of the data and owning all of the access rights and dictating all of the solutions that the world will want.
Right.
If innovation is to remain, the world must demand a democratic cyberspace where every individual can do whatever he or she would like to do with the software that they create within their own namespace.
Right. And
that namespace should be protected so that other people can't get in and they can't influence others inappropriately. Any relationship needs to be through an introduction.
Right.
And the golden tokens that I spoke about earlier are the mechanism for introduction. I have an address book of golden tokens. Yeah. That address book is abstract in the sense that it doesn't just talk about individuals that might live anywhere in the world. It can also talk about digital objects that I want to secure. And it can talk about functions that I use and applications that service my needs. And they're all represented in one form as a digital token. The A, B plus minus C of a simple mathematical expression is a representation of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But it exists at machine level.
Right.
Machine level.
Yeah.
And now you're not making a choice between centralized and distribution, because the mechanism itself is not centralized in the first place. Okay. There is no privileged mode in the computer that, I don't know whether I said this, and your listeners might be interested. This is not something that hasn't been proven. What I'm talking about is an architecture that was implemented by the Plessey PP250 that I worked on when I first graduated.
Right.
We delivered it, and it was used by a military program called Ptarmigan for 10 years. It actually saw service in the first Gulf War.
Oh, wow.
So this is not an abstract proposal. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is proven technology. There's nothing new here. There are lots of new things that could be done. It could be done much better than we did it at Plessey, knowing all that we know now. But the mechanism itself is well understood.
Okay. So let me ask you this, just to get it right in my mind, and for those perhaps who, it might help them to understand. So are we saying that the processing of the internet as such is taken away from these big data centers kind of thing that are owned by?
No, I think big data centers will stay.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of them will move into quantum computing.
Yep.
Be quantum data centers. But the access being done from a binary computer will always remain dangerous. And for the public at large, it's a problem that they can never cope with. Even the scientists can't solve the problems of the binary computer.
Right.
After all these decades, we're still suffering from international freezes in Windows systems caused by a single failure. Single point of failure is not acceptable in the systems that lead forever. Who would design a bridge that you knew you could guarantee would fail?
No, exactly.
And I'll say one other quick point. The problems that Boeing is having all originate from designing software without the reliability necessary to be able to sustain those flights that crashed. And what the arrogance of the design team, said our software is so good that it will eliminate the pilot, the errors of the pilot. So when the pilots took off and whatever caused the first fluctuations, they tried to re-engineer the center of gravity as an abstraction,
right? Because
the engines were too heavy and too far forward, or whatever the details. They tried to abstract the center of gravity, and the poor pilots, when they tried to correct the flight, were cut out.
Yes. I remember. I know.
And the planes then nosedived into the world, into the ground.
Yeah. And that's reliance on software.
My view is that kind of an error is going to occur again and again and again, because it's so complicated now to build the complex software around the way binary computers can break, that you spend far more effort on the problems than you do on the real functions that you're trying to achieve.
So in that case, Kenneth, is it ever going to be resolved? We can always think about, oh, it shouldn't happen, this can stop it, this can do that. But is there any, I guess, hunger to deal with it?
Well, this is my opinion, that there's a distinct possibility, probably greater than 50%, that we will do nothing about it. Industry will refuse to change, government don't understand, and we'll keep plodding on until the world burns.
Right.
And hopefully in the ashes, somebody will come out of it. That's one reason why I wrote my books. Hopefully somebody will see the right way of doing it next time.
Next time. No, exactly. Oh my gosh. And that is human nature, isn't it? Right. So yeah, right. So we're just going to, oh no, it's okay. We'll just leave it. It works for now. That it never happened. It'll be okay.
I'll be dead before it matters.
Exactly. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's not my problem. It's like someone else's problem in 30 years' time, as long as it doesn't happen within my lifetime. Yeah, I mean, and this is the problem I think that we have with trying to address this.
Which is why I equate it to COVID-19. We have to treat it as a pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm doing everything I can with my books and with my contacts to promote the idea that we create a challenge for industry, funded by the government, to say, could be a collection of governments, but certainly those who are democratic, to develop a solution along the Church-Turing thesis. And if we have 2 or 3 examples, the government goes one step further. I don't know whether it was the same in the UK, but over here, the vaccines for COVID-19 were issued free.
Right. Yes, here as well.
To seed the market, in the expectation that once people understood, they would adopt it without any problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I think it was largely proven true. So if we had the solution that really worked, and it was delivered with, let's say, within the next, who knows exactly when the deadlines are going to come, but in the next 24 months, which it could be done,
right,
for a modest amount of money, a sliver of the Pentagon's annual budget, then we could start to talk about some real results that would prove themselves in the working place. And I'll go one step further and say the fact that you make the machine that everybody uses symbolic means that everybody becomes a programmer straight away. There's no need to understand an operating system. That's just a detail that went away when we changed the symbolic addressing.
Okay.
All you need to know is the abstractions in the functions you're trying to create.
Which can be
program them at the keyboard, perhaps.
So that can be easily sort of, I guess, the end user, such as me, would be able to easily understand that then, would they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You understand complex things in other subjects because you hide the details behind the wall of lambda calculus, which is a science that covers everything in nature, as well as it's the science of computation that lambda calculus solves.
I'm going to have to look this up because I need to know more about lambda calculus in the future, I have to say. Okay, so let's have a quick look here. We have discussed the battle between big tech and digital democracy a little bit, but do you think that those sorts of we also spoke about democracy, didn't we, and about the abacus and things like that, and how it opens up democracy, tech like this? And do you feel that the golden keys are a tool to use towards digital democracy, or have they got this completely wrong? Is it because it secures the system?
It obviously, being secure and being atomic puts it on the same level that natural life works at.
Right.
Your body is atomic. There's fundamentally no difference between you and me. If you piled up our atoms, there'd be the same number of each kind. It's the combination that matters.
Right.
It's the structure that matters. It's the connections between the objects. Another observation I'll make is that within a binary computer, there are no roads. There's no understanding of connectivity at the programming level.
Right. Yeah.
And the absence of connectivity at the programming level means that anything goes. There's no rules. There's no rules of the road. There's no ability to keep anything on track. So the solution has to be atomic. And as long as that is true, then everything else will work out.
Right. So it's interesting, isn't it? So that again, as a layperson here, then I would see, okay, I can see the collection of cells, I can see the collection of atoms, it going down even further. I can see all of that. But isn't that all controlled by an operating system called DNA? Completely different.
That there could be some truth to that. I'm no expert, okay?
Right.
But DNA is more like a program than it is a solution.
Yes. I said, okay, I'll go along with. I see what you mean. Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Because it's a set of instructions, as opposed to an operating system.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I thought I might have something there, but anyway, it's the layperson in science. There we go. Okay, fantastic. Which, funnily enough, brings me on to kind of what we were talking about. People nowadays are feeling pretty powerless, I think, in terms of the face of in the face of AI-driven cyber threats. We're talking about misinformation, we're talking about propaganda, we're talking about elections coming up from now onwards are just going to be, well, it depends on your viewpoint, I guess, but can you actually trust any output from now on? And if you think about those threats, especially when we look at elections, we just don't know what could happen with deep fakes or anything else like that. We see the reactions that the public have to some sort of deep fakes in some countries where the deep fake is completely believed and the propaganda it's bouncing is completely believed, or it's not even just propaganda, it's a message, for instance, a call to action that may happen. If that's making sense, I hope. What I'm trying to say is, I guess, at the end of the day, I feel that there's an issue with potential warfare because of AI-driven propaganda. Now, and that could be perhaps a president of one country is made to say something else in a deep fake that completely starts wars, or you know what I mean. I'm making it really basic here, but what do you think about that? I mean, how do we actually go about ensuring that these things don't affect us? And does your system, in a way, help us to keep that under control?
Okay, so my view is that whatever flaws we have in the current system, they're going to get exploited.
All right.
And so the situation is going to get worse. All of your worst dreams are going to come true.
Yeah.
And at some point, there will be a tip in society between ignoring the problem and dealing with it. I can't forecast when that'll happen.
No.
But until that happens, the course we're on is terminal.
Interesting. And I don't disagree with you, because unless something does change, something's going to happen, isn't it?
Right.
I
see it on a bigger scale in the sense that whether we like it or not, the fight between good and evil is part of human nature. Whatever promotes the good thoughts and the bad thoughts are driven by the human mind, and thousands of different people all around society and the world. And they all get entrenched in their positions. And they will all use computer science, which is just a new force in the universe that we've never had before. And they will use it to their best advantage. And we can't ethically stop that.
Right.
It's nonsense to believe that we could. The only solution we've got is to bury the mechanisms into the hardware, to guarantee that people follow civilized rules implemented through science,
right,
that are unquestioned and universal. And then we have a chance to build on that structure forms of civilization that work at higher levels, because they can count on the lower level being beyond question. Trusted software, trusted hardware, trusted because the incremental powers are guaranteed to be unassailable. So now imagine the golden tokens I talked about earlier. Golden tokens is an abstraction of a mayor's chain.
Right.
The mayor has his golden token around his neck, and he can use it to exercise certain powers that the city gives him.
Yeah.
And he has to give the chain up when his time is due. Elections can meld into that perfectly. Let's imagine you build abstractions for every aspect of government, and they're all accessed by golden tokens. In the USA, we can have a presidential election, and he gets the president's token in cyberspace.
Right, yeah.
That is an abstraction of the powers that he has. And so he can only perform those functions that are due the president.
Okay, yeah.
And every member of Congress has an abstraction that represents the powers that they have, which isn't just a federal issue. It could include some local issues as well. And the local government has abstractions that represent how they allocate power. And the power in this system is all managed incrementally. I know what I'm talking about is well beyond where we are today.
Sure.
But by offering the mechanisms in the infrastructure of computer science, we allow society to build abstractions on abstractions. And they will all be secure and trusted if you understand what functions you've created and how they use the tokens.
Yeah, sure.
So now everything that we've created in society, let's talk civilized society, over the thousands of years that society's been developed, can be abstracted. And the abstractions that the French use will be different from the abstractions that the British use and the abstractions that the Americans use. And none of them will relate to any of the nonsense that's going on today about, do I subscribe to some digital dictator or another?
Yes.
Or do nothing, because you have no chance of going on your own.
Yeah.
But you have to see this in the fullness of time. We're building a digital society of the future. And no expense should be spared, and no engineering gaps should be allowed that risks the future of digital society.
Well, that's because the consequences are too great.
Too great. It's like designing a bridge you can guarantee will not work.
Fascinating. Kenneth, I think we're going to have to leave it there, you know.
That's fine.
I've been amazed. I'm going to go away from here, and I'm just going to be thinking about golden tokens and trying to learn more about what it is you've said, especially about abstractions. I think that's amazing.
One of the things that I would really hope comes out of this is that anybody who watches this talk would be moved enough to actually make a comment. And that is the way the public builds democracy, by allowing the individuals to reflect on what they understand. This to me is so critical that it's going to take a public revolution.
Oh, calling for it to happen. Right.
Calling for it to happen.
Yeah. Which, well, let's say that would be a great thing, wouldn't it? If everybody rose up and actually demanded digital security, I think, would be fantastic. But for that to happen, people need to be educated. And hopefully we're taking little steps towards that today by talking about this. So listen, Kenneth, fantastic. It's been fascinating meeting you. I hope that you've enjoyed educating us as much.
I love talking about it. It's important to me, and I want to see it. I want to see it come about, but it does take public support.
Right. So there we are, everybody. we want comments. Make sure that you are in the comments here, and Ken, you're going to be checking these comments, I know, and being able to respond to them. So that's great. So
Right.
yeah, get in touch. Let us know.
And I could say just quickly, if I may, I run a blog. I call it sipantic.com, sipantic.com. It will take comments too. And there's lots of material in there about the books that I've written and the architecture underneath it.
Ken, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we speak again soon.
Thank you, Chris. Take care now.
Take care to you as well. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the BrightWord Books Podcast. A huge thank you to Kenneth J. Hamer-Hodges for his insights into the future of AI and cyberspace. Now, if you're as fascinated by these topics as we are, be sure to grab a copy of The Fate of AI Society, Civilizing Superhuman Cyberspace, the latest edition, which is available now. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with fellow thinkers and tech enthusiasts. So join us next time for more conversations that challenge the way we see the world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep turning the page. See ya. Bye.